Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and as always, by my good friend and business partner, the dear Mr. Jason Neal Patrick Harris Johnston Yellen. Welcome back to our podcast, Jason.
Thank you. I was welcome back in the last episode.
I know. Yeah, I like to...
Welcome back again.
Thank you.
I'm back again.
Back again. Guess who's back? Back again.
Jason's back. Tell a long-time podcast listener.
Have you been, Jason?
Tickety-boo.
Yeah.
Tickety-boo. Gosh, we're just working our way through the summer, aren't we?
Yeah, we're working our way through the summer, and as it comes closer to its end, I shouldn't say that, right? That's you pointed out the other day to me. You said that's depressing.
Banish you.
You said that's depressing.
I banish you. Don't just because the kids have gone back to school, the summer continues.
So this is what has me going. Delma, by the day after this episode goes live, she will be moved into college.
Look at that, man. That is time. It passes.
It passes. It just it's it keeps going and it doesn't stop.
Makes me think of our starting the company, right? 13 years ago, we had small children. Mm-hmm. And now we're 13 years in the future, and the eldest of the four is off to college.
Jesus Christ. Your little comment there is actually a wonderful little segue into an email we received back in May.
Okay.
That I inadvertently marked as read. And so I hope
Joshua,
I know, Jason, I'm not a perfect man. I'm not a perfect man.
Oh, let me just take a note of this for your annual review. Okay. Note has been taken.
All right. How many demerits do I get for that?
Oh, God, there's nothing left to demerit. Your demerits have demerits.
So yeah, back on, let me grab this email here. I read off of electric things. I don't need PDFs. I don't need to print things out.
Yeah, you're making a mistake, my friend.
But on May...
Just another demerit in a long list.
Fuck. Man. Hopefully I get a remerit soon. Is it a remerit? Because you get merits. Does a demerit turn into a remerit, which is a merit? Is it canceling?
Moving on.
Okay. So back on May 8th.
How does time work? I don't know, but it's passing really slowly right now.
Here, let me show you this pot of water I'm boiling.
Skip to the future.
So we got an email on May 8th. And again,
oh, Lord.
I know. I need to apologize. This is from Keith Duncan. And Keith Duncan.
Have we heard that name before?
We have had that name before.
Okay.
Hello again, Keith. On the other side of the pond. He lives where you used to live, in Scotland.
In Ayr.
I don't know if he lives in Ayr. No, he's an Edinburgh guy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Keith Duncan from Edinburgh.
Yeah.
What does he have to say for himself?
So the subject of the email says, how did it all begin?
Oh.
See?
Okay.
Right? This is what I was saying. It's like perfect. It's the perfect segue.
Lovely.
So he says, Dear J, J, and J, and then parenthetically says, assuming you've released her from the cupboard you store her in between episodes. Smiley face.
Paging HR.
We have binders full of women. We have cupboards full of women. So he goes on. He says, I was driving up through glorious Perthshire scenery, which, for once, wasn't hidden by rain and clouds, to the spirit of Speyside Whiskey Festival.
Oh my gosh, a beautiful day for a drive in the Highlands is unlike no other.
And guess who he was
beautiful.
driving with? Who do you think he was driving with?
Somebody from Edinburgh?
Someone from America.
Oh. Spirit of Speyside. Somebody went to Scotland from America.
Oh man, if people could see the smoke just emanating from your head.
I don't know. I don't know who Keith Duncan knows. I don't even know why I'm trying to guess this. Who was he traveling with?
He was traveling with our very own Greg Schwartz.
Oh shit!
Director of Water of Life
man.
film. Yep.
Oh,
So.
okay.
Yeah. So he goes on. He says,
Didn't Greg see Jess round about that time? Anyway, that's a separate
Yeah,
story. It doesn't have to be on wax.
Yeah.
Moving on.
He goes on and says, we were listening to your most recent episode, and very entertaining it was too.
Thank you.
While pondering the mortality of squirrels, the conversation took a I love that the squirrels are they're always going to be in conversation here. The conversation took a turn.
Using always very loosely there.
The conversation took a turn, and I asked Greg, hopefully for the best. Maybe this is for the worst.
I know the conversation took a
Took
turn.
a turn, like, oh, jeez.
Yeah. So squirrel. So squirrel. Where do you stand on Greg death?
And I asked Greg if he knew how you both met and how Single Cast Nation started, given how far apart you live. And neither Greg nor I knew. So, given you were almost begging for more mailbag content, winky faced.
Please write to us, please.
Please, with the cherry on top.
info@singlecastnation.com, please.
How about you let the nation members who may be in the same position as I am know? Loving your work as always, Slanja, Keith, and Greg.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, cheers, Keith. I appreciate you reaching out. And yeah, gosh. It is one of those things, right? When you tell the story for 13 years, you assume everybody has heard it. You're just boring people at that point. But the fact those two gentlemen didn't know it, that's something else. I will also say, as much as you are still in Connecticut and I'm in Virginia, where we're now, depending on traffic, 7 to 9 hour drive apart. When we met, I was in the inland northwest while you were still in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And at that point, we were about 3,000 miles apart.
Isn't that wild?
And now we're, 400 miles apart now?
Yeah, about that. Yep.
About that?
Yep.
So yeah, it was even farther. But yeah, it was... the old joke is it was J-date, but that joke probably doesn't resonate in Scotland. Might not even resonate in large parts of America.
We are Jays, right? It was J and J date.
That's how we met Jess.
That's how we met Jess, yeah.
Page in HR. It was, I'd started the Whiskey Host blog. I was starting to, put some tasting notes up there. I was working my way towards the Good Scotch Drink blog. You'd read the Whiskey Host blog.
Yeah, I started off reading blogs. Yeah, exactly. When you had the Whiskey Host blog, but it first started with Dr. Whiskey, Sammy Simmons, and then I found Whiskey Fun.
Yep, Serge.
And then I found yours, and I was really drawn to yours because your notes were always very clear, concise, and when I tried whiskeys that you were writing about, our palates just clicked perfectly. Like, I discovered the notes that you were laying out, and I think at the time you were also... How should I say this? I think at the time I was looking to start a local whiskey club and had no clue how to make that happen. And that's sort of what Whiskey Host was aiming to do, help people start whiskey clubs, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. There was a handbook, there were tasting mats, there were recommendations on where to get your whiskey, recommendations on how to budget for a society. It was a good little product. I believe it was not my idea. I had started a whiskey society in the inland northwest in Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho, and this December we turned 20, which
amazing.
very, very proud of that. once again, as time flies. And it was actually one of my members who'd said, what we do here, what was it, one Friday a month for 6 months out of 12. And he said, what we do here is just so great. Could we write this up? Could we turn this into something? And he did the legwork. He started putting together. I was consultant. We thought it needed a website.
Yeah.
So that would have been around 2009.
Okay.
Needed a website, needed a blog around that time. And then it was, well, what do you write on the blog? And so it was kind of, well, here's some tastings. Here's getting into some whiskies. Here's some things of interest. And then in the April of 2010, I'd made the move into Good Scotch Drink. And then that was an attempt to do a 7 days a week whiskey online magazine kind of thing. With different guest writers on there. Sarah Bergfeld was on there. Ben Barton was on there. Jim Hendigas was on there. And we were just trying to make a sticky website that would give people a reason to come back every day. With that and Whiskey Host came joining Twitter. Very different landscape, very different proposition.
It wasn't the cesspool that it is now?
In 2009. Yeah, I've said it before on the podcast, but at that point you could actually know all the whiskey people on Twitter.
Yeah, right.
And actually interact with all the whiskey people who were on Twitter. Do you remember Richard Patterson had an account that only posted in all caps?
Yes. I'm like, why are you screaming about Dalmore to me?
And then you see him on YouTube and you're like, oh, he just shouts a lot.
He just shouts a lot. That's his thing.
And so, you were reading Whiskey Host, you were reading Good Scotch Drink, you reached out to friend me on Twitter. And then, as I famously say in all the tastings where this story comes up, like I looked at Jewish dad with a love of music and whiskey, and I was kind of like, I don't know, what need do I have for this jamoke?
What need do I have? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Like, what if this guy's an absolute asshole? Like, I don't want to friend an asshole. Right. And so I looked at some of your other friends. I looked at some of your posts, and I was like, all right, he doesn't seem like an asshole. Yeah. Little did he know.
Famous last words.
Entire dissertations have been written on how little did he know. And so that's Stranger Than Fiction reference. And so then we just started chatting over Twitter. Then we started sharing samples. You started Jewmall. I read. You started Jew Single Malt Whiskey Society.
Correct. Yeah.
And I read that. Yep. And I liked what you were doing. And I liked the fact that you were doing something different than me. Right? You were writing esoteric notes, and of course the famous one is Mark Boland's Blue Velvet Suit as a tasting note. And then that little. Who knows which year you did this, but that little series you did on the Isla distilleries, comparing them to genres of music as opposed to just bands.
No, specifically bands, right? So like
specifically bands.
I said Ardbeg was Slayer, and Bowmore was David Bowie, and so on and so forth, and that was picked up everywhere. That series even made it into the Illich, the Isla newspaper talked about it. And Bruichladdich were I compared Bruichladdich to the Sex Pistols.
That I remember very clear. I just didn't know if you'd maybe thought of them as punk, but you specifically referred Sex Pistols.
Correct. And Carl Reevy, of blessed memory, now gone, really took to that and did a distillery-only bottling because of that post, which was such an honor.
Phenomenal,
right?
Really phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I could see that you were doing things that not only was I not doing, I wasn't even thinking about doing, and so that was really appealing and really interesting.
Cheers.
And then I say, famously, for a small group of about 150 people, famously, you had texted me ahead of Thanksgiving 2010 and said, I've got an idea. Do you want to tell me whether I'm crazy or not? And I had a hunch that you were going to ask what you asked.
Yeah.
And then you had said, I'm thinking about turning this into an independent bottling company. That's brilliant. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
For 2010, there wasn't a new independent bottling company coming online every day.
Right? Yeah,
So
exactly.
it was like, independent bottling. Interesting. How would we do that? And then the thing I always say is, if we had known what we didn't know, we would never have tried to start that. Not knowing what we didn't know allowed us to be like, yeah, we got some money together, we're reaching out to some industry folk, we're going to get some casks,
Easy breezy,
pop them in some bottles, get a label on it, bring it in, sell it.
Off you go. Yeah.
We'll just put one foot in front of the other. Yeah, it's phenomenal to look back on that now. So, yeah, there you go. Story as old as time. A digital, a digital meeting of the minds.
So, with this in mind, this is, I think this is the episode of segues. In a minute, we're going to hand it off to my conversation with Tzvi Wiesel, and Tzvi actually talks about his own whiskey origin story as starting from Whiskey Jubilee. And
I was going to, at some point today, bring up Whiskey Jubilees. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, Whiskey Jubilee was a festival Jason and I ran from 2012 to 2018, starting in New York, then added Chicago, and then added Seattle to that lineup. And wild, right? And then in 2015, our friend Nachi, who had helped us the year prior with setup and, helping out vendors, so on and so forth. The next year, he'd called Tzvi, who had just come out of the Army. He was in the IDF, just doing his tour of duty. And Nachi said, hey, there's this whiskey festival. Do you want to help out? And I don't want to tell too much of the story because I think Tzvi does a good job telling his own story. But what I like about it is he talks about this evolution in his own whiskey journey, which maybe we can touch on once we come out of the conversation.
Yeah, please. I'll also hold my comments until the listeners have heard from Tzvi himself.
Beauty. All right, to me and Tzvi. Tzvi Wiesel, thank you so much for joining me today. You and I have a little bit of history together, going back to some of the early days of Whiskey Jubilee, which we may or may not talk about. And I'm happy to touch on that because, to be honest, those were some really good whiskey times for me, and getting to know you in those earlier days was awesome through our friend Nachi, right?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and you should know that you are my villain origin story.
Villain? Oh man, I was hoping for a hero here.
Well, that I mean depends on which side of it, but no, this is I think, I don't know, I must have done 10, 15, 20 podcasts now, and they're always like, so how'd you get into whiskey? And it basically all goes back to the Jubilee. So,
wow. That's awesome. Yeah, so I definitely want to talk about Baxus and what it is, how you got into it. But I think this is actually an important thing. This isn't just for personal reasons, but quite often when we have people on, we want to hear their origin story and that spark. So with you, what was that origin? What was the spark in whiskey? The rabbit hole that you found that made you just jump down it?
Yeah, so it really was the Jubilee. So in 2015, I had just gotten out of the IDF. I finished my service. I get a text from Nachi saying, "Hey, I'm working at this whiskey event. I volunteered last year and I got to try all these great whiskeys. And do you want to work there?" And I'm like, "Sure, sounds great. Sounds like fun." And at that point, I genuinely, I can count on one hand the number of whiskeys I had tried. It was 3 different versions of Johnny Walker. It was, the red, the black, and the blue.
Just like through a tasting pack or something like that?
No, through, I knew that I had the red. I tried the black because somebody said it was a little smokier. And then my great uncle was in Israel for a wedding and he brought a bottle of Blue Label. And I was told that this was the greatest whiskey ever made. And so I had to try it. And other than that, it was Monkey Shoulder and Maker's Mark. Those were the 5 whiskeys I had, I think, prior to the Jubilee in my entire life. And that's how I was walking into the Jubilee for the first time in 2015. That was my entire mental model of whiskey. And the catalyst really was that night, though, was walking around the event. Because I tell everyone when I showed up there, like originally I thought it was like, I didn't know what the job was, because Nochley was just like, you just work the event. And so I assumed they're like, oh, you're big. Like I'll be some sort of bouncer or whatever. I'm hearing whiskey event and I'm imagining, people falling over themselves drunk. And it's the exact opposite. Like we got there early, we helped set up the tables and everything. But that year you were still doing the pre-event tasting panel. And so I was just standing like a, fly on the wall in the back. And like you had a 5 pours, you were doing a flight and you were leading a tasting. And I was like, these seem to be some pretty serious people who are not just sitting here like, smelling these glasses and all going like, oh, yes, the difference between the Johnny Red and the Johnny Blue is the color of the bottle. Like there was definitely something to it. And I think that over the course of the night, especially because, what was awesome about our role was that it evolved into just taking care of, which is something I always heard from other people that you guys did so well at your events, was our staff role after we set up the tables turned into taking care of the vendors.
Yes.
You had, I think, 60 or 70 brands that are there that are represented. There's, it's a 4-hour, 5-hour event. People are walking around eating and they're just there pouring and talking the entire time. And you guys got incredible food. And so you told us like, go make sure that the people who are pouring have food, which was awesome. Cause we'd go over and be like, all right, what do you want? And so first of all, they always loved it because they were like, this is the best event ever, because normally we stand around and everyone else is eating and we have to stand here and watch them for 5 hours. And to our benefit, it worked out really well because they obviously were grateful to us, the staff, because this is where I always tell people, I'm like, I became a whiskey collector overnight because at the end of the event, they tipped us like with all the open bottles. Like they just, gave them to us to bring home. And so for me, I went from having zero whiskey whatsoever to, I think I came somewhere between 20 and 30 bottles, like from that event.
Wow.
Like when we split them all up.
Okay.
And for me, that was awesome. Because any bottles I got that were sealed, I then used as gifts because I was like, oh, I just saved myself a ton of money by not having to buy gifts. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then anything that was open, I would invite my friends over and I'm like, hey guys, like we don't have to go to a bar tonight. We could save some money, come over. Let's drink what I have. And so I spent a lot of time after that learning what it was that I liked.
I really want to dig into this because going from an origin story, a super villain origin story from the Whiskey Jubilee to starting a massive, online company like Baxus that really helps people manage their collections and sell some of their bottles off. Again, I want to get into the nitty gritty of that, but you're going from tending to vendors at a whiskey festival to opening up a pretty big company with a lot of money behind it. So what does that transition look like for you?
So I can trace it all back to one bottle that really set me off on this path, and that was the Glenmorangie Signet.
Okay.
I had tried it at the event. I loved it. There was a tiny, tiny bit left at the end, and I can't remember his name, but the brand rep, gave it to us to distribute in the raffle, and I loved it. And so I traded like two picks. It was like the NBA draft. I'll give you 2 future draft picks for your, for the Glenmorangie Signet or whatever it was. So, so I got the bottle, went home, drank a little bit of it. Came back to it a couple of nights later, drank a little bit more, and like again comparing it to other things, and I was like, wow, there's something about this. There was what I now would know would be like mouthfeel. There was like a syrupiness to the whiskey itself that I really enjoyed. So I was like, okay, great. Let me just go buy another bottle. I'm almost empty. So I went down, to a liquor store in Manhattan, and I was like, okay, never mind. That is a ridiculously expensive bottle because the local liquor store on the Upper West Side wanted like $350 for it.
Yep.
I worked in the city, but I lived in Jersey. And so another night, a couple of nights later, I went to Total Wine in Jersey and I walked in and I saw the bottle on the shelf for $150.
Oh, Wow.
And I was like,
Okay.
and I mean, this was 2015. So, you could still find whiskey at that price.
I know, but still, the difference that you could see between two retailers. Yeah.
Well, that's what set me off on the rest of this entire journey was I was like, wait a second, people in Manhattan are paying $350 for a bottle that I can buy in Jersey for $150.
Yeah.
So I started to text some friends in the city, so what is it that you guys are drinking and how much are you paying for it? And it turned into a New Jersey to New York, rum smuggling operation where I would, I'd sell them 50% between what they were paying in the city and what I was paying in Jersey. And it meant that I could get, my Glenmorangie Signet for free and they could get their alcohol for far cheaper than what they were paying in the city.
Okay.
And what ended up happening, because back then Total Wine, based on your total spend, you got access to their, it wasn't even a raffle at that point. It was just, you would get access to their limited edition bottles. And so I get an email that you've, qualified for, and a bottle I had never seen or heard from before. I'd obviously heard of Pappy Van Winkle.
Yeah.
I'd never seen a bottle, but I'd heard of it. And I get an email that it's you are selected, you've spent enough money here. And the irony being that the money I was spending was just me buying as many bottles as I could to bring to other people. And it was, you've spent enough money here to get a Van Winkle family lot B.
Oh, wow.
And so I look at this bottle, which is this nondescript label that says Van Winkle on it. And my first thought is, wow, this is some sort of knockoff Van Winkle product. I assumed, I'm this is some sort of knockoff Pappy.
Yeah.
And so I texted you about it and I'm like, what is this? And should I get this? And you were like, and you said fairly, you're like, listen, it's good whiskey, but it's not worth the price that, people are asking for it. And I was like, well, wait, what's the price people are asking for it? And you're like, a couple of $100s. And I was like, well, they offered it to me at 75 or 80. And you were like, yeah, at that price, it's worth buying. So I was like, okay, cool. So I bought it and I texted it also to my sister-in-law because she had just bought for her husband. She had just bought him a bottle of bourbon. I knew something for as a wedding gift, some fancy bottle.
Yep.
And I asked her, I'm like, what did you buy? And she told me, this Van Winkle Lot B. And I looked at it and it was the same exact bottle. Now I know that it was actually different years or whatever, but that's not why. And I was like, okay, well, how much did you pay? And she goes, oh, I found one store in New York that had it and it cost me $900. And I was like, okay, I'm used to making $50, $25 bringing a Glenmorangie Signet across the river. I was like, what do you mean that this $80 bottle you just paid $900 for? What, how am I getting scammed by Total Wine in this situation?
Yeah.
And the answer was, I wasn't. That's actually was, 10 years ago, that was the RRP on it. That was the MSRP.
Yep.
For me, there was definitely a point at the very beginning. And you said this to me flat out. You said, you're like, listen, you told me way back when, I'm not into this idea because these are super allocated bottles. And your point was I'm not pro people going and trying to buy up cases of this when they hit a liquor store so that they can go and sell it for more money online so that they can just go and pocket the money.
Yep.
And I'll say flat out and honestly, all I heard from that was, wait, you can get cases of this stuff and sell them online and pocket the money.
It's awesome.
So I definitely, my initial point was it started off as I am enjoying whiskey, but it was definitely wait, there's real money to be made here. Yeah. And so for a couple of years, it turned into okay, let me go hunting for these things. Let me try and find bottles purely with the intention of flipping. I turned into the worst of the worst in that regard, where it was now again, for other reasons, it was also very much so paying my rent, but it was still again, it was still very much so on that side of the market of I got the whiskeys that I liked and I enjoyed and I bought them. Now, one big advantage, a huge advantage that I had that I think other people don't when they start off in whiskey was that my first experience being at the Jubilee, the first thing I learned about was independent bottlers, was IBs from you guys in Indies. And so most people, so that became the best advantage I had because more often than not, the Indies sell for less than, let's say, the OBs, the branded bottles that come out of the distilleries.
Yep.
And so I had my own secret stash of, I could drink great single malt scotch, which was for me at the time, and even that was really my go-to, and pay substantially less than I would have if I was buying, I could buy a signatory, Glenmorangie G12 instead of the Glenmorangie. Although Glenmorangie G12 is actually pretty well priced.
Yeah.
I could buy a signatory Glenmorangie G20 instead of the, typical Glenmo 20 or 21. And I could pay substantially less than I would, if I was buying, again, that OB. Mm-hmm. So I had my own drinking hack of like, hey, if you want to drink great whiskey at not in crazy prices, like go look for the IBs and find them. And at the time there were not even that many shops in the US that were carrying them, or definitely in the supply. So it was even then still mostly out of state. It was, okay, these bottles are only available in California or Massachusetts. But the issue was, is that California used to, but a lot of those places wouldn't ship or couldn't ship. So it turned into developing a network of local whiskey friends and being like, hey, there's a bottle I really want to drink, up in Boston. Next time you go to that shop, do you mind grabbing me one and then sending it down to me? Like, what we call muling. Like I'll pay you for your costs and everything. But like the point is they're not upselling me or charging me more. It was like, can you get this for me? And so that happened. Then at the same time, it started to happen on the flip side where people were like, hey, you're in Jersey, you're in New York. Like there are these bottles that don't reach our markets around the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking that they're crazy allocated, Buffalo Trace products. They're just saying like, hey, there's an interesting, some interesting release or a single cask or something that we can't get. Do you mind sending it over? And so there was definitely that element going on at the same time. It was not no, that's not worth my time because this is a pure profit engine. Yeah. It was very much so yeah, of course. Like if you have a specific bottle that you're pointing me to say, like, if you find this, like I don't need to upcharge you for it. It's more when I'm going out there, like, hunting, trying to find a bottle with the pure intention of reselling it. Yeah. But I learned a lot about both the 3-tier system on the global level, how alcohol distribution works or doesn't work rather. But most importantly for me was that I built up a really, really great community because when I got into this, like I said, I couldn't afford really high end or expensive whiskeys, but I got a chance to try things that I then developed a taste for. Yeah. And develop a group of people that was I could bring something interesting. My grandparents were moving and they're like, hey, come clean out our basement. And I found some, old bottles, again, nothing fancy, blends mostly, but from the 70s. And so when I went to a whiskey meetup, I was able to bring one of those, bottles with me or something and share them with people. And they'd be like, sure. And they'd have no problem sharing with me their, I guess what were they drinking at the time? The 2016 Yamazaki Sherry, which was a phenomenal bottle, but wasn't $5,000 at that time. And so I had a chance to try things that I otherwise never would have because of the people. Yeah. And so for me, that got me hooked on whiskey as okay, there's this two sides of this world. There's whiskey, the asset. And there's whiskey, the social bond, the thing that brings people together. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of very much so. And I was very lucky that it formed simultaneously. I saw both of those sides of the same, the same product could be something that somebody, like you said, is buying it to open it with their friends and family, to sit on it, to save it, to have it for a special occasion. Yeah. And so I started to realize okay, and I started to dislike in a lot of ways that, what you refer to, that secondary market, the pure flipper market. Yeah. But what I started to really appreciate was it's the fact that this will go up in value over time that leads someone to say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to drink every single one of these, limited edition releases I just got. That made it that bottles that I heard incredible things about, that I was still able to find them. I'll just, as a perfect example, I think it was either the first or second year at the Jubilee, you guys released the Great Isla Swim. Oh yeah. Yep. At the time when you released it, there were very few for sale. Mm-hmm. It was I think it was $300
$500
or so, maybe a little more.
Yeah, 500.
500, yeah. Which was to me I can't spend that on a bottle of whiskey. Mm-hmm. Even though you guys were very gracious and gave me the opportunity, and now looking back, and I have been hunting that bottle ever since. Now that I can afford the $500 bottle of whiskey, I've been desperately trying to find it because I tried it. You guys gave me some to try. Mm-hmm. And the story of that bottle is so cool. It's such an amazing, incredible story that I'm I must have this. Now, my hope is that not everyone drank theirs. I'm hoping that somebody still has one sitting somewhere unopened so that I can go back and get it and the point is, and I'm happy to I'm happy to pay them more for the whiskey. This isn't like, oh, you're trash. How could you buy this for $500 in 2018 and not sell it to me at the exact same price? It's, tell me how much you want for that bottle. Like, that bottle has significance to me, especially because, again, it was really, I mean, the first year that I was there, 2015, was when you guys did the Heaven Hill, right? Was that 2015's release?
No, so that was...
Or 16's?
That was
2014.
2013. Yeah, 2013, because 2012 was our first Jubilee. 2013 was the first Jubilee where we introduced a festival bottling, and that's when we bottled the 15-year-old Heaven Hill.
Right. Okay. So I'm like going through it. So Nachi had been doing it since 2013.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. That's what it was. And because I was in the army, so these pictures, we had been talking about it, and I got a chance to try it because same thing. You guys were very gracious, and you let him buy a bottle, even though there were like 50 or 60 of them that came out of that barrel.
Yeah, 67 bottles.
That is crazy. With naming rights, with every, and so, but again, and do you remember how much it was when you brought it to market?
We sold it. I think we initially sold that bottle for $85.
Sorry, I almost choked. I
waited until you had a cup of coffee by your lips to tell you that.
Yeah. So to put in context for people, and we'll get into Baxus later, but like we have a bottle of that listed on the site now, and we have people who are kind of circling it like in the, I think $5,000 to $8,000 range.
Yeah.
Because there were only 67 bottles of it ever made. And like, most people opened them. They're gone. Like Nachi, it was an $85 bottle. So Nachi opened his and he shared it with me and with friends and everything. And it was fantastic. And then that's what it was. And I was like, wait, guys, this is great. Can I get one? This was in 2015. And you're like, I'm sorry, they're gone. And I was like, how is that possible? You're like, there were 67 of them and there were like 400 people at this event. I was like, right. Okay, fine. That makes sense. But the beauty of it is now is that, again, like, first of all, I mean, that whiskey having been such legendary whiskey to begin with, like somebody can still go and get that because of the fact that like there's maybe I'd say 5 or 6 bottles of that haven't been opened that are still out there.
Yeah.
And those bottles now hold that value because people who had a chance to try it or who read a review from someone who had a chance to try it are like, this is some of the most legendary cask strength Heaven Hill juice on the market. Ibra, I think that's what it's called, like the European bourbon or one of these other groups that had done like a cask strength Heaven Hill, also super short barrel. Like I just saw one of them go for like, I think it was like 12 grand.
Oh my gosh.
Like, and it was only a couple of years before yours, but that's the thing is like people, for these bottles that have achieved legendary status, like people hunt them down. And it's the fact that no one was buying the Heaven Hill bottle for $85 at the Jubilee and flipping it for $3,000 or $600.
Yeah, that world
wasn't happening.
Yeah, it just wasn't a thought even.
But it was the fact that over time, there are so few left of these bottles of legendary status that the price has now become astronomical. And it's the first thing I tell everyone now who says I want to get into whiskey collecting or whiskey investing or any of those things. I'm like, the first thing I tell them is like, do you drink whiskey? And they're like, if they say yes, I said, okay, so if you're going to speculate on whiskey, make sure the ones you are buying are bottles that you would be absolutely comfortable having to drink.
Okay.
Because there is literally no guarantee that the bottle you buy goes up in price or goes up in value over time. And so what you really have to be doing is saying, is this a whiskey that I want to drink in 10 years? Then if it happens to go up so much in price that it's not worth drinking anymore, no problem. Sell it into the market, buy yourself new bottles.
Yeah.
But if not, you have to be prepared to drink. You have to be prepared to drink it because, again, it's not especially now with these limited edition releases where there's 250,000 bottles being pumped out by major brands. It's like you do realize those bottles will never it'll be 100 years before those bottles trade at like some sort of collectible secondary price because it'll take 100 years for people to finish the 250,000 bottles that are in the market right now before they actually become scarce. And guess what? If the whiskey isn't that great to begin with, which on a lot of these bottles, unfortunately now it's not because it really is more marketing than product. Like people don't realize that it's not just the fact that it's finite, it's the fact that it's sought after. And what makes whiskey sought after is either you have a personal connection So I, for example, I'm super excited. We're my wife and I in about a month or so are expecting our first kid.
Wow.
And
Congrats.
Thank you. And so I hunted down 2 bottles of Old Grandad.
Okay.
Both of which are from the year that they were both distilled or bottled. One may have been distilled, one may have been bottled. Like it was just, finding something with the year.
Yep.
From the years that my father and my father-in-law were born.
Oh, wow.
So, 1958 and 1969. And so like now my father-in-law and my father and I, when we get together, hopefully when the baby is born and we're, raising a l'chaim and doing a toast, like to me, it was so cool to find a bottle of Old Grandad because, playing on the Old Grandad theme from the years that they were born. So like I had to hunt those down and I spent way more than the, $3.99. I'm sure that they were on the shelf in 1969 or whatever it was. But it was so worth it for me. Cause like, that's like, it's the history. There's a bit to it. There's something to it. Like, so I'm grateful for the fact that whiskey, is not like wine. It doesn't get super temperamental. You don't have to worry that it was stored in the absolute perfect meticulous conditions and that I can still go back and find a bottle like that. And I know people who hunt down bottles where they have like a photo of their dad in, the military and like he's sitting there with like a bottle of, Jim Beam or something and there's a date on the photo. And so they'll hunt down like, whatever it was, a 1963 bottle of Jim Beam so that they can, recreate the photo and then drink it with their dad. Like that bottle you had with your guy. Like there's something about whiskey that I like romantically fell in love with, like learning about it and truly. And that's why I really give like you guys the credit for this at the Jubilee, because it wasn't like, again, I was prepared to be like, the reason they want me here is because I'm a big guy and I can carry drunk people out to the street. And like, in reality, I got there and it was like the exact opposite. It was like, no, like come over. Like you guys even said, like, I'm like, oh, we're working. We can't. And it was like, no, like, be responsible. Don't get drunk. But like, you can go over to the tables while you're working and also try things and learn about it. And so like, I got pulled into because it also wasn't just, sure, the big brands had their brand ambassadors and their brand reps, but like I met Raj.
Raj Sabarwal
from
Glass Revolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Glass Revolution. And so Raj and these other people are there, like speaking so passionately about the products, and he's importing and bringing in. And I remember I tried Blackadder for the first time, and I was like, "This is crazy," because like that was, I think, the highest proof of anything I had ever tried at that point.
Yeah.
And I think I almost burned my face off. I was like, "Why does anyone drink this?" And like now, ironically, it's like if I drink something that's, I felt awful. This is just I one time went to a bar and I ordered a drink and he gave it to me and I gave him a huge tip after because I felt awful. I accused him of having watered down the whiskey. I was like, and it turns out it was just a typical like 40, like, 80 proof, 40% ABV. And it had been so long since I had like a 40, like, just a Jameson or whatever it was that like, I felt so bad because like that's like the worst crime you could accuse a bartender of is like serving and I was like, I'm so sorry. I like gave him a huge tip after that because I was like, you know what, this is my bad. This is like I've ruined my own palate. This is not you. But yeah, so that's for me. It really like, again, it came down to this romantic side of falling in love with the people behind the whiskey also, and so I kind of think all of that comes into like that's what led to to Baxus was all of this.
Yeah. Thinking back a few years, some of the main reasons I was on the some of those secondary pages, and that's as far as I'll go. Like I don't want to name anything. I don't want to say where they are. People who know. But some of it was me looking for special bottles like. Wild Turkey Cheesy Gold Foil is easily one of the best whiskeys I've ever had in my life, and I've gone through 2 bottles of it because it's just remarkable. And there are certain bottles where I say, well, if this ever pops up, I need to look at it because it does have that special meaning to me. Like the first bottle of Aaron that I've ever fallen in love with. You could see it here, that orange one, the 15-year anniversary 11-year-old Amontillado. I see that and I want to pounce on it because there was like a turning point in my own experience. you seem to have taken this idea of folks trading on the secondary market in places where they likely shouldn't be trading on the secondary market, to then legitimizing it and building upon an idea, something that few people have seen. So I wonder if you can talk about what Baxus looks like, how you created it, and what you're aiming to do with it, for those that visit the marketplace.
Yeah. So Baxus, in the aggregate, is, like you said, like the first and foremost, if I had to describe it to someone, it's a marketplace for whiskey. Mm-hmm. And well, really spirits in general, all spirits. Yep. I'm a little biased towards whiskey. But what it goes beyond that is, so what I discovered in these groups and in this world is that the second worst thing you could do is have to overpay for whiskey that should be readily available.
Yes.
But the worst thing you could do is overpay for fake whiskey. And what I started to notice with these groups was that, like, as the value of the bottles became higher and higher, the amount of fraud grew higher. And also, so like there are now groups of people that like track eBay to keep tabs on like empty bottles that are being sold on eBay so that they can catch them when they show up on the secondary markets as having been refilled. Like, and that was something that I started to see more and more of, unfortunately, was fraudulent bottles being sold in the markets. And what I also noticed was there were people who I was in certain groups with, who I was in multiple different groups with, who I would see buy in one group for a certain price and immediately, before they even had the bottle sent to them, go and sell it in another group at a higher price. Like, it became almost like an information arbitrage. Like, if you had access to different groups, you could get the bottle. Now, the end user in that second or third or fourth group was the guy who was actually buying the bottle for like his bachelor party or to open it with his friends or to do, with his, and so that he was the actual end target consumer. And so it kind of like put all of these different ideas into motion, it put all these ideas in motion of like, how do you eliminate that information element? How do you make it so that these things are all readily available, like the information and the bottle and the pricing history and the data to the consumers?
Yeah.
So that they can be making educated decisions and realize like, and so for Baxus, what I mean by that is like, we don't just show you, here's what the price of a bottle trading on Baxus, like we aggregate all of that information. So it's the auction data, it's the other secondary pricing data, whatever we can find on a bottle we make available, because the answer really might be, this is not the best price for this bottle because it's a user generated marketplace. So like you might have two bottles. So one bottle of Weller 12 is priced at $175 and you may have another one that's priced at $350. And the whiskey is identical. It's just that one user wants to sell it for more and one user is okay with selling it for less. And so showing that information means that users don't end up overpaying for bottles as much because they now have a Kelly Blue Book, so to speak, to at least know what this bottle is going for on the secondary market. Because unfortunately, as much as we'd all love to get all of our whiskey at retail, it just, it's not, unfortunately, it's just not the name of the game.
Yep.
And so for us, that's like really, that was something that became really important, was creating a trusted market, but also creating like real transparency on the pricing. So what Baxus does is people actually send us their private collections. So the bottles that they have taking up rooms on their shelves behind them, to the point where they're, forced into a bunker to have enough room for all of their whiskey. And we authenticate each of the bottles that comes in. So we have human experts as well as an AI model that we've built and are continuing to train on the image scans.
Wow, okay.
We scan each bottle 360 degrees. Yep. So like you actually are seeing not just here's a stock image, but like if I'm buying this specific bottle of Glendronach, like I see exactly what's going on. If it has a foil that's ripped, if the label is damaged, like you're seeing all of the details over there. And then it goes into your account. And again, you have access to this pricing information. So you could see what your collection is worth, even if you don't want to sell, if you just want to keep it, all of our vaults are fully insured and they're temperature controlled. So if you just want to make sure like, hey, I have a really valuable bottle that I want to hold on to, and I just want to put it, think of it as a safety deposit box for your whiskey or your spirits.
Yeah.
You can do that with us also. But if you also want access to a marketplace where you're like, hey, I have 5 of these bottles and I drank one and I didn't love it. You know what? I bought a case of it and I actually don't love it and I'd like to sell it and buy other stuff. Mm-hmm. You have direct access to this marketplace also where you can then sell to other people.
Yeah, I like that. Early on when you and I discussed this, you talked about some of the technology behind this and, oh geez, what was the term? It's the same technology that RØDE and Merkin uses to track their own production. What's it called? Help
Blockchain?
me out. Help an old man out, Tzvi. What is it? Blockchain. Yes, thank you. So,
blockchain.
Can you talk about that aspect of Baxus?
Yeah. So this is the part that I obviously love from the tech side, and that we keep it on the back end a lot because it understandably it's like a new tech and people are like, I don't want any of your online fancy internet money. And we're like, no, this is like for us, the blockchain element of it and what we love about it is that blockchain creates a permanent digital record. So right now, if you upload something to a Wikipedia page, you or Wikipedia can delete it. You can censor that information. You can remove it. Mm-hmm. And then let's say you say, oh, well, you go to the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive can also remove things, and they have. And so there's a way to, manipulate online information. And one of the biggest issues I had early on when I was doing this with auction houses was I started to notice that there was data disappearing from auctions that I had tracked, that bottles either hadn't sold for high enough or didn't hit reserve. Now they're better about it because people had to call them out, or a bottle was sold at an auction that turned out to be fraudulent and that bottle's transaction disappeared from the internet and from their website because they didn't want to be affiliated with it. But what I realized was I'm like, that's actually really negative, because if a bottle is fake, you should actually have it plastered everywhere on the internet so that somebody doesn't accidentally go and buy that bottle from a guy who tries to sell it to them in a back alley.
Yeah.
Or in an IKEA parking lot. Not that I've ever done that or know anyone who's ever done a meetup with someone to buy a bottle of whiskey in an IKEA parking lot. But
there's got to be a Swedish word for that. Like
for
bottle flip-ong or something.
There's something. We will find it.
There's an umlaut in there somewhere.
We will find it, and we'll have Mac Myra distill it for us.
When you start talking about blockchain and doing 360 images and all this, some of our early discussions were around, wait a second, is this like whiskey NFT, which always puts a bad taste in my mouth, just the idea of NFTs in particular. And so I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit and maybe dispel that misconception.
I guess the most important thing to note is like an NFT is just something put onto the blockchain that there's only one of, that like can't be fractionalized, like can't be like it's one, like there's one whole thing. Like it's just like if I were to put if the government were to recognize titles to houses or land deeds, and I were to put one on the blockchain, like that would technically be a non-fungible token. Like that deed is the deed to the house. Mm-hmm. So the issue with NFTs, though, is, and correctly, they have a terrible rap because people, when they were bored during COVID and had nothing else to do, were selling JPEGs of monkeys for $3 million on the internet. And so like that's what NFTs became associated with, was not the underlying technology, but like just literally this, like an NFT to most people, and you're totally right, is a picture, is a cartoon picture that somebody paid too much money for.
Yep.
Like that is what an NFT is. Yep. And so technically, and I want to be like, technically all of the tokens of the bottles that we give to people are NFTs. Like that's just but not in the sense of these NFTs are, all of that is abstracted from your account.
Yeah.
So when you log in using your email. The bottles show up as just bottles that are in your account, like they're there. Mm-hmm. If you list the bottle for sale, now on the back end, you're listing an NFT for sale via our smart contract and all of this, and the person buying it is buying that token, but they're one-to-one redeemable. That's like why we use like the non-fungible ones, is that like if you buy from me a cheesy gold foil 1989, mm-hmm. you click in your account and you click redeem, and you put in your shipping address and you pay for shipping, and a real cheesy gold foil 1989 shows up at your door.
Yeah.
Not a Kodak, instant pic of like it's not a digital JPEG of a 1989, So, and for us, that was the important part, was that blockchain means that we can now keep track permanently and publicly of all the different accounts that have owned this bottle. So if a bottle changes hand 20 or 30 times, the accounts are anonymized unless somebody like assigns a screen name or a username to it. But you can actually track how many times a bottle is trading hands. But more importantly for us was that we now know who actually owns it, in the sense of why it makes it useful is, let's say right now you have, trying to think it's hard to use another example because there aren't really people doing this in a great way. But let's say it's a safety deposit box, right? And you put your grandfather's watch in the safety deposit box, and you want to gift it to your daughter, right? Like, you have to go to the safety deposit box, take the watch out, and physically give it to her in order for her to have it. So now she needs to go get her own safety deposit box, go back to the safety deposit box to put it back away. By doing this on the blockchain, if you want to gift a bottle when your daughter turns 21, if you want to gift her a bottle for her birthday of something from her birth year, you can just send it to her account digitally. And the way that like PayPal made it that you can email people money, with Baxus, you can email people a bottle of whiskey. And then it's in her account. And she doesn't even need to have a Baxus account yet when you send it to her. Just in order to claim and redeem the gift, she clicks in and it creates an account for her, and the same thing. And now she can choose to say, hey, you know what? I'm actually more of a mezcal girl. I don't want this bottle of whiskey, or she could say, hey, this is sentimental because my dad gave it to me when I turned 21.
Yeah.
And so I want to keep this here, and I want to share this when I have a kid who turns 21, and like keep it in the vault, stored, secure, insured, like all of that builds off of there. And so that's kind of it's the unfortunate side of NFTs is that they were ruined for us. This is why we can't have nice things. Because of these JPEG people, and it's why, by the way, you'll see on our site we don't use that language because exactly that. Like when we talk about on Baxus, I'm trading. When I buy a bottle, I'm buying a bottle. We don't talk about I'm buying an NFT, I'm buying a token. You're buying a bottle. The token, in the same way that like if you make a purchase on a liquor store website, like yes, you're getting a bottle, but it's actually just an entry into their database. Like one bottle goes out of inventory and then it goes into shipping. The database here is just public. It's not just the Shopify being run by this liquor store. It's now something that anyone can see. And so what that also really does is it eliminates the ability for people to try and secretly manipulate prices. Because you have deals like this where somebody will be like, all right, I'm going to buy your bottle of, I don't know, something that there's only a couple of, and I'm going to drive the price up, and then you're going to pay me back. And the transfers of the funds, the prices people are paying are all public. So you can't start trying to do secret deals to make it look like the bottle is worth more, which we all know happens on auctions all the time. But that's what we're hoping also will happen with Baxus, is that because there will be more transparency as to the pricing and what the real secondary values are, the prices themselves will level off in a way that will prevent this massive amount of like overinflation into it. Like I'm not going to get into the super finances of it, but like we model this out as like the bottles are almost a derivative of what the barrel of whiskey is worth, because you see this all the time. I'll say this, but I'll deny it. And okay, you run my favorite independent bottler out there, like in the world, like my favorite one. And I mean it. And by the way, those are actually always on display. I didn't just put them out for now. Awesome. And again, I am grateful because I have hunted down so many bottle of your woodcut series Imperial. Like if those were endangered animals, I would be like serious. I'd be a criminal. Like I'd be wanted. Like I have hunted down so many of those like Imperial bottles because I tried it for the first time, having never had Imperial before. And I'm like, this might be one of my favorite whiskeys I've ever had. And so the people who buy them, because you guys at Single Cask Nation, when you do your sales, you work really hard to do fair distribution. So it's not like, people are buying them and flipping them. And there still are people who do it, but you guys are pretty in line with it. And I know that you've cut people off because because they've bought it with the intent to flip.
Correct.
But I'm grateful that the market exists because I am going to hunt people down if they have this bottle sitting on. I'm not ashamed of this, but I have bought open bottles from people also, like, of your stuff, because I'm like, looks like you're not finishing that 24-year undisclosed bourbon that was aged in Scotland. I might be interested in that. And like and they're like, oh, okay, cool. And I'll trade them sealed bottles that they can either drink or sell or whatever it is, because these are whiskeys I love, that there's a finite amount of, that there's only so much I'll ever be able to get my hands on. And like, I know that I want more of them, because even if they never go up in price, even if they go down in price, because the one thing that needs to happen for a whiskey to go up in price also is that, like, and I use Willet as an example. Some bottles of Willet are like, some of the most expensive bottles in the American whiskey world are Willets. Mm-hmm. But there are very few buyers of them. It's like a very small cult of like, if you know, like you need to know the individual number and like, like two of them that might be the same age statement and like similar ABVs, but one of them is worth thousands of dollars more, like, because it's a very small group, but they know exactly what they like. They know what they want. They know what the legendary status ones are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because of that, and because they're so expensive, there's no new way for people who are new to the market to get into it, because it's like, well, I don't have $15,000 to start spending on bottles to like discover what is good and what isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, I might be in many ways, and I'm okay with this, like harming myself in the sense of, if I buy up and drink and open with friends as many of these bottles as possible, and I'm a nobody, if I'm like, I don't, have a blog and a massive review, they'll never go up in price because no one will know what they're missing. But I'm like, that's fantastic, because I will then buy up all of them for pennies on the dollar and like enjoy them for the rest of my life, so there's always that element. But to go back to the cask thing, like you've said this before, one of the biggest issues was when you got started, you could get a Heaven Hill 67 bottle Heaven Hill that you could, at 15 years old, that you could afford to sell to people at $85 a bottle.
Yep.
If that bottle came to market right now, I would guess the MSRP on that bottle would be close to probably between $900 and $1,200. And I don't mean, and I mean just to offset the cost of the barrel itself.
Yeah.
Because the barrel of that whiskey would probably cost you about $600 to $700 a bottle in cost, like just for the whiskey.
Exactly. Yeah. The cask market has completely changed, and in part because of investors, people investing in casks, but in part too, the whiskey landscape has completely changed. And in 2013. People were only just starting to get into bourbon. In 2013, people were only, like, it wasn't until I think early 2014 that Jim Murray had mentioned, that Yamazaki Sherry cask was the best whiskey in the world, But before that mention, I was buying that for 55, 65 pounds a bottle and leaving the rest on the websites for people to buy. And it's a completely different world. And I love what you said, earlier about being able to track the value of different bottles so that people don't artificially inflate them, which I think is really important. It's so easy to do on a more non-regulated secondary system. People can get duped. And if they're like you, if they're like me, and they want to buy the bottle not necessarily for future, to sell it in the future for a much higher rate, but simply because there's a date attached to it, right? Like I think of Jason, and he would look at certain Henry McKenna's that just, they're associated to his son's birthdays, and he wants to open these bottles with them when they turn 21. These are really important things, and isn't it nice? I think that you have this historical data, so you can say, wait a second, someone's selling this for $300, and it really should be a $90 bottle or a $150 bottle, or, insert price here. I think, for as much as I struggle with the idea of the secondary market, and mostly just because I don't like the aspect of just buying to flip and then moving on. But, for those that need the secondary market to access bottles that they didn't know about early on because they weren't into whiskey back then, but now they are and they understand the history, I think it's really important and a very cool feature to have, so they're not getting, excuse my language, they're not getting fucked.
Yeah. And I mean, perfect example of that is, again, people that were not buying for the sake of secondary, but I've met with kids of recently deceased parents or elderly couples who are downsizing their homes, and they're telling us, and you go to estate sales, and these people are getting taken for a ride.
Yeah.
They might have, again, a sealed bottle of Old Granddad from 1969. And so they're like, well, it still has the $5.99, sticker on it. And so give me $50 and it's yours. And that guy's going to flip it online for $750, $800 a bottle. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And part of it is like, hey, we had this one woman, Baxus was at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival for the past few years, but in 2022, we were there in 2022. And this woman comes over and says her husband recently passed away, and she had been begging him for years to get his quote unquote crap out of the basement. And somebody told her like, oh, if you have old bottles, go talk to these guys. And she was getting ready to sell the house and move, towards where her kids were. And she's like, yeah, I'm just looking to get rid of these. And she showed us the bottles. And I was like, I didn't want to say this to her disrespectfully, but I was basically like, ma'am, the bottles in your basement are worth more than your house.
Oh my gosh.
Because he had been buying bottles. And again, it wasn't to hoard or whatever. Hoarding, yes, but he had been buying by the caseload, like one-off releases or the limited decanters. Again, the beams don't always appreciate in the same way, like those old beam decanters, but like,
yeah.
The wild turkey decanters that look like the turkeys, the stuff like all of those actual things, the old rip, like pre-pro decanters that look like old Rip Van Winkle, like sitting there on the, and
Yep.
tons of them in perfect condition because he just left them in his basement. And so we were like able to help her like properly. And again, we didn't even at the time, like our marketplace wasn't set up yet. Like we weren't ready to go, but honestly, I love the fact that we could sit with her and say, like, do not accept anything less than or at least not. Here are the prices of what these sell for in the market. What you choose to sell them for. If somebody comes in and says, I'll buy, let's say the collection's worth $300,000 and I'll give you $200,000 in cash right now. It's yours. Do what you want. And that's what we always say on Baxus is like, we can only give you recommended and suggested pricing. We're not forcing you to sell it at a price. We're not forcing you to accept a price or to buy it at a price. We're just giving you access and information. And like that for us is the most important thing is like access to the bottles and access to the information and data about what they should be worth.
Yeah.
And so for her, it's like, we don't want you to get ripped off because it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And then most importantly was we went through all the regulatory hoops to make sure that we could get the system set up legally because those groups, like forget the fact that you could be defrauded or those places where people trade right now. The biggest issue is that like, it's not 100% kosher because like you need liquor licenses, you need like proper things to actually sell alcohol. Like you need to either go through an auction or a license. And so
prepare to fast forward.
Preparing to fast forward.
Fast forward.
Fast forwarding, sir.
But your typical brand that has to go through the 3-tier system to the importer, to the distributor, to the liquor store, then to the secondary market, they have no idea that Joshua is actually the biggest Aaron fan in the world and is collecting every bottle. And so through the platform now, and again, in this anonymized way, we can put Aaron in touch with you and say, hey, we see that you have this huge collection of our stuff. We'd love to invite you to this event or this tasting. And so we actually tested this out. Campari invited Baxus to do a Russell's Reserve pick at Wild Turkey.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so we went into the Baxus and Booze App databases, and we found the 2 users who had the largest collections of single barrel Russell's Reserves. Okay. And these were people who on their bar currently had over 50 or 60 bottles each and had a ton that they had consumed in the past that were finished. And so Campari covered like meals and housing, but we paid for their flights and we flew them out to Kentucky. And these 2 Russell's super fans got to come and do their first ever Russell's barrel pick. Wild Turkey didn't know them. Campari has no idea who they are. But now we're like, hey, you're super fans. Like we can tell you who they are because they are hunting these down. Every time a state gets a single barrel drop or a liquor, they hunt it down. They buy it on secondary. They get their friends to get them for them. They are known. And now you know them. So if you ever wanted to do something, because ultimately, and you know this more than anyone, I think with indie brands, and it's again, I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass, but like really whenever I talk to brands or people want to launch a brand, I'm like, okay, go study Single Cask Nation. Go understand what it's like to build a community first, because that's what you guys did. And I know that SMWS, which started way before I got into whiskey, has a similar thing and built out their memberships and their clubs. Start with the whiskey community. Start by, you guys, if I recall correctly, you and Jason just started bottling stuff for like a club, like for friends, right? Like you got into this on a whiskey blog, like together and connected that way. And so if you start with the whiskey community, when you release something, we're going to buy it because we trust we know that you're not just saying like, okay, listen, I got stuck with a ton of whiskey that I didn't want and I got to sell this to somebody. And so I'm going to stick it into a bottle. You're saying no. You've said, and I know this because you've let me try some of your samples. You have said no to barrels that I know you could have made so much money on just because of the name associated with it or the age statement, because you're like, well, it's not my flavor palette and the price I'd have to sell this with, I'm not comfortable selling it to the market at that price.
Yep.
And I think, again, I respect that a ton. And so this is the last point I'll touch on, just on the auction, on the, you mentioned the cask investors. So a lot of cask investing is very bad. And I know this because I worked for a cask brokerage, and a lot of the barrels that we did, they had a rule that they would only sell to independent bottlers. They wouldn't sell to individuals and speculators. And I was for years hounding them like, oh, but I know guys that would buy this stuff up in a second. They're like, are they putting it into a bottle? And I'm like, no. They're like, then we don't want to sell it to them. For that reason. And this was, I'm sure every business model has changed over time and, to keep up with it. But what I learned when I looked at new distilleries starting, and this is where a cask investment actually excites me rather than scares me, is right now when you want to launch a distillery or a brand, it takes 12 years to make 12-year-old whiskey. There's not, I don't care how much you say you can speed it up. You can't. Like, even if you could recreate the flavor profile perfectly, which you're not going to be able to. It's not going to happen. But if I'm a new distillery, that's why every single one of them is like, I'm selling vodka and I'm selling gin and we're producing an RTD and we're selling soap made out of grain. And we're like, they have to find ways to economically stay in business, because the deals and the terms that they get from the banks or the hedge funds or the private equity groups that are financing them are designed because the people financing them are they're financial institutions. Like, they're in it just to make money. And and I understand that. And that's, it's great because it keeps the market moving. But imagine now that you have a new distillery, you're producing whiskey, or you're launching an IB, and you know that the best way for you to be able to sell a 12-year-old whiskey at a reasonable price is to buy it at 8 years old and wait 4 years. That the 8-year-old to 12-year-old gap is so large, like, that's where you have this curve. Yep. And so, but you don't have the money to buy all of the 8-year-old barrels that you would want. And so now, through this market, and through Baxus, you can, like, we literally have now people who are taking loans against their bottles and their barrels. Okay. When you bottle it and you sell it, again, you pay off the loan, you bottle it, you sell it. Great. You've made the spread and the profit. As opposed to, and the lender is happy because they have, they're getting 12%, which is a great return. But if you default, if they walk away, they've gotten a real physical, tangible thing that, like, they can actually want. Now, for a bank, this doesn't interest the bank necessarily, although it does anyways, because they'll take 12%, they'll lend against anything. But, if you give them enough data. But what this does now is the people who are lending money against people's whiskey bottles are whiskey collectors and fans. So if you have a bottle of that's worth $5,000, a Springbank that I really want, like, I don't know, a green Springbank, let's say, that I had tried, one time because some very, very kind man shared it with me. And I'm like, this is super cool and I want it. Or even better yet, a great Isla Swim. I'll lend you that money at, let's say it's worth $3,000. I'll lend you $2,000 against it. Now, you could do whatever you want with that money. You can fix something up. You can run your business. You can go get a new guitar or do whatever it is. However you want to spend your money, it's your business. It's like but imagine now a credit card, you're paying 1/3 of the price as if you would buy that guitar on a credit card. If you pay me back, fantastic. I made 12%. I'm happy. You got your whiskey back. You're happy. But let's say something comes up and you can't pay me back. Okay. I just bought a $3,000 bottle of whiskey for $2,000. I'm thrilled because I actually wanted the whiskey.
Yeah.
So it's not just like a bank when they give a mortgage against a house and then somebody defaults on the mortgage and then they're like, crap, we need to, now we have to go figure out a way to sell this house and auction it and this. It's like the people who are now lending are the actual end consumers. So when you think about like pawn shops, for example, like the biggest issue with pawn shops is like, they're really predatory, right? Because they know that you need the cash, and so they can get it, and then they can go and sell your stuff off. But imagine like a whiskey pawn shop, but the people lending you the money are not some random faceless bank. It's like, hey, I'll buy that Springbank off you. And you're like, well, I don't want to sell it right now. And they're like, all right, I'll lend you the money. And if you pay me back, fantastic, because I make interest. And if you don't pay me back, fantastic, because I just got the Springbank I wanted anyways, and I got it for a discount.
Wow. That's awesome. That's wild. I remember you explaining that to me a few months back, and I was sort of grasping it, but now I'm seeing the full picture of that. Listen, there's so much more we could be talking about, because I know, you're alluding to developments, and I'm sure there's developments behind those developments and so on. We've definitely gone beyond scratching the surface, but there's more beneath it. So maybe there's a second conversation down the road. Until then, I wonder if you could just, let people know how they can find Baxus, and then maybe I'll toast to you. We'll have a little l'chaim.
That sounds perfect. So the website, the marketplace is baxus.co, baxus.co. There is a salon website that is baxus.com, like a salon technology, and hit me up, salon technology, if you're listening to this podcast. I would like your website also, because people sometimes have trouble finding us. But again, baxus.co. And then I would say on Twitter, it's just Baxus.co. We do a lot of tweets, and we give a lot of information there if we're doing like a special release, or my favorite thing is to post when bottles are like really good market prices. Mm-hmm. I always share them. I'm like, hey guys, this, Old Crow Chessman is listed at $750 instead of $1,000. Like, great buy, like snag it up or whatever. Or yes, but it's a drinker because like there's a tear on it. Like, you can give that type of information.
Yeah.
And so I like to do it over there. And then I would also recommend, and I won't say too much because like you said, it's a future development, but I would really recommend that everyone download Booze App if you're a whiskey fan. There are going to be a lot of rewards coming out in the not so distant future for people who are tracking bottles actively on Booze App. So if you have a bottle that's not in there, add it. If you have bottles that are in there that are in your collection, add them to your collection. And like I said, 2 people got to come down to Kentucky on our dollar to do a Russell's pick just because they're Russell's fans.
Yeah.
So add stuff to your wish list that you don't have that you want. And there might be some surprises coming in your future.
Amazing. Well, Tzvi, thank you so much. It's funny, you mentioned 2015, and here we are. We're almost 10 years into knowing one another and being friends. And I treasure you as a friend, and it's been great to watch you evolve through whiskey and create something that, again, back to this idea where I bellyache about the secondary, and you've worked to help legitimize it and use it and turn it into something that's helpful to people who want to drink, who want to open bottles and want to share. And I think that that's really cool, and it's admirable. And I thank you for putting in the hard work to do that. Like all throughout this conversation, without you saying it, I kept hearing consumer protection. And I think that is very cool. So thank you for what you do and the rest of the team at Baxus. And until next time.
All right. And thank you for sending me down the rabbit hole.
Thanks for joining us down the rabbit hole.
Wonderful conversation, getting a chance to listen to Tzvi, just somebody who we have such a warm history with, and just an absolute mensch. And just to reiterate what was thrown in there, and I was going to say this before the interview, but I held it until after. One of the things that was remarkable about the Jubilee, many things were remarkable, but the teams who helped us on the day and to run the festival were always remarkable.
Always.
And not only did exhibitors mention them, but attendees mentioned them as well, because they were always on the go. They were always helping. They were always doing something. they would go to exhibitor tables and say, "Could I get you a plate of food?" Like, I had exhibitors say, "I've never been asked at any festival ever if somebody could get me a plate of food." That is amazing. Yeah. So kudos to all of our teams. To be clear on something with Tzvi, he flew from New York to Chicago to be part of the Chicago Jubilee team that set up, broke down, ran the event with us, collected tickets, helped with food. Like, that is phenomenal. And I will never forget the fact that Tzvi did that.
Right.
That is above and beyond. And to be clear, we did not pay for his airfare.
No.
To be clear.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. He just, he did it to do it. And, he's just an amazing human. So thankful to have been introduced to him, to know him, and to watch his journey and his evolution across these years, which is now, I mean, close to 10 years now, which is pretty amazing. And so, really, really excited for what he's got going on with Baxus and what they're doing. I like that. In a way, he's trying to be the anti-flipping website, where he's really helping people to manage their own portfolio. And if they need to unload bottles, they do. If they want to find bottles that mean something to them, like, I think, there's this, some people like yourself will collect certain Henry McKenna bottles, right? Because you target specific dates. And I like that. When you go to his website, you can find that information. You can help to find the bottles that have long gone, right?
Yeah.
I'd love another Wild Turkey cheesy gold foil. It's anyway.
That's an interesting pause that you inserted there.
Oh, I'm not going to be getting another one. But anyway, so
not with that attitude.
Tzvi, thanks again so much for joining us and talking, and look forward to meeting up again, sharing some drams, and
cheers, Tzvi. Dedicated news segment in this episode. As we said last episode, we remain in the summer. We do have bottles on boats. We have bottles in cases on pallets waiting to be loaded. We've got a lot of things ready to go around the world. And we will get to them in due course. We are very excited about them. To reiterate what was said last time, bottles remain on the Single Cask Nation website.
Indeed.
And you, Joshua, last week had posted, there's a YouTube video, and you'd also emailed the nation with our SCN Wilderness Trail Rye Sazerac.
Yeah.
And that was a corker. Absolute corker. The email went out last Thursday, and I think the video got posted last Thursday as well. And I made that last Thursday night.
Oh, you did?
And so delicious. That earthiness, that delicate nature of the Wilderness Trail with the orange bitters that you suggested replacing the traditional Peychaud.
Yeah.
I think we're both kind of seeing how we pronounce that. So, I thought that was a lovely...
That's how we pronounce it.
I love that move that you made there.
Yeah.
I tell you what remained interesting, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is that absinthe rinse that you recommend. And then we have a Wilderness Trail Rye that's more floral than it is spicy.
Yeah.
What did you think of that marriage of the kind of the licorice aniseed absinthe with the Wilderness Trail?
Well, so the first thing that I'll say is it's not that I recommend an absinthe rinse. It's that a Sazerac is not a Sazerac without the absinthe rinse. So it really needs that to complete it. And similar to, say, a vodka or gin martini where you do that dry vermouth wash, you're not getting a vermouthiness in that cocktail, right? What it adds is really quite subtle, and what the absinthe adds is really quite subtle. And I'd argue you don't get any of the licorice quality coming through. Rather the rye spice with the orange bitters seems to cancel out the licorice notes, and what comes through is just a gentle herbaceousness.
Yeah.
And a little additional sweetness, right? Because that absinthe has sugar in it already. Well, whether it has sugar or not, it has an inherent sweetness to it that's being added. That's sort of like supported by the delicate herbaceous quality to it. So it's what I like about this cocktail, as opposed to some other cocktails that do this. This cocktail takes all of the flavors and unifies it into one nice sort of flavor delivery, where in some cocktails I don't want that. Some cocktails I want to taste the bits and bobs. But in this one, I like how it sort of Voltrons itself into just a really nice sort of bright, refreshing, summery kind of cocktail. And I mean, it's 2.5 ounces of rye, so you still get the rye. But Haida, who does not like whiskey, what she likes about this cocktail is it takes away the oak that comes through a bit and just allows some of the grain sweetness to come through, and so it becomes a whiskey drink that even she could get on board with, which is super cool.
Yeah, I'd recommend for anybody listening who didn't receive the email with the YouTube link in it, go to Single Cask Nation YouTube, look up the Sazerac cocktail as presented by Joshua with the SCM Wilderness Trail. If you're here in America, the Wilderness Trail on the website, $60. Wonderful sipper, wonderful cocktail ingredient, host of other things on the website as well. A lot of different flavor profiles on there.
Oh, yeah.
And again, sippers, cocktail ingredients, gifts, bottles for sharing with friends. Well, I think we've got a lot of different ways you could take advantage. Speaking of taking advantage, this is the episode of Seguis. Buy a few, $300 gets you free shipping.
There you go.
$300 purchase, free shipping.
There you go.
Take advantage of us.
Please take advantage of us. So listen, with that behind us, I am sitting here with a glass that is filled with a little bit of Westland whiskey. These were some advanced samples that we got. And the one I put in my glass, hopefully it's the same one that you have in your glass, but it's the Westland wine cask finish.
Exactly. And when we received these, they came in under embargo.
Yeah.
The word was not yet on the street. And so we, being respectful chaps, kept the information under our hats. We did just last week see the email where Westland are now advertising that these are available on their website.
Yeah. Yep.
So again, if you're in the US, you can check Shop Washington, you can check Shop other states. These will be going global. So you will have a chance to see these in global markets. I don't know when, I don't know how, but keep an eye out for them. If you've got friends in America, definitely lean into that opportunity.
Yeah.
And thank you to Anna, our friend Anna, who we always reference here.
Yep.
She made sure that we had these for a cheeky wee taste.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anna.
Joshua, I just wanted to frame for listeners, and I know we've got a lot of Westland fans listening to the podcast, but Westland used to have 3 whiskies in their arsenal.
Correct.
And there was a peated, there was a sherried, and there was a third.
I think it was just American oak.
Ah, good job.
Yep,
Good
yep.
job. Good job. And then 3 became 1.
Correct.
Where they got down to Westland flagship. And flagship remains the flagship. And we have a little flagship beside us in this pack as well. So the flagship is there. But now the flagship will get a bit of company from wine cask finish, which we're tasting today, today's episode, and beer cask finish, which we will taste in our next episode when we drop an interview with Stonning. And Lasse from Stonning will be our guest. Last thing I'm going to say before I open the floor or step back or perhaps even take a sip is the wine cask finish is leaning on Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, and Washington Red Blend casks.
You know, I'll be very honest. When I saw this as a wine cask finish offering, I got nervous because my palate typically doesn't line up with the wine cask. If I'm drinking wine, if I'm drinking wine for enjoyment, it tends to be a white wine, lighter, a little crisper, somewhat fruity, typically dry on the drier side. When it comes to red, maybe I'm enjoying that with food or something like that, but I don't tend to enjoy it just as is because a lot of the flavors just don't sit with me.
In wine. Okay.
And so I said, okay, well, it's Westland. I've got to give Westland a shot. They were nice enough to send the samples. I poured it, started nosing it, and off the bat, the wine comes through. And for me, it's sort of the prominent note. You dig in a little deeper, and some of the chocolate malt comes through, some of that 5 malt. Mash bill comes through. And what I liked is it, similar to our conversation about the Sazerac cocktail, is that I think the spirit is doing a good job of taking the wine influence and drawing out a bit more of the fruit and a bit less of the tannins. And like for me, red wine is dirty socks, and I'm not getting any of that dirty sock kind of thing. I'm getting the fruit and some of the earthiness coming through.
And that was the very question I was going to ask you. And you said you get the wine coming through. Do you get it coming through as a berry note? Do you get it coming through as a spice note? Do you have it come through as an alcoholic note? And now so sometimes for you, wine coming through means dirty socks, but you're not getting dirty socks here.
No.
So what form is that wine taking when you get it coming through here?
A sweet earthiness.
Sweet earthiness.
Like that sort of like warm potting soil coming through, and maybe some, strawberries that are going a little off, but yet that sweetness kind of emanates from it. So some strawberry sweetness.
Often that little fermented fruit note for me can suggest the yeast.
Yeah, sure. Yep. And then also like a lingonberry or cranberry, like something in that more tart kind of red berry quality.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely getting... I like what you're saying there about strawberry. I like what you're saying about strawberry maybe on the turn. I like that detail here. I'm also getting a little bit of milk chocolate happening on the nose. Like there's a warmth to it and a building richness to it.
That's got to be a grain note or a grain-driven note, right? With the chocolate malt coming through?
I would think so, yeah. I would think so.
So this is a cask finish. Do they talk about the length of time in these casks? Okay.
No, sir.
Well, I mean, it's kind of...
No, but the one thing I will say is these are both batched releases. Okay. And so these are each batch 1.
So these will be continuous releases just in the form of batches. Okay. And the ABV is 50%?
Should be 46. 46.
No, 50% on my little sample bottle.
Oh, interesting. 46 on the card that came with the sample bottle.
Whoa, there you go. Well, okay. We'll call it 48. Meet in the middle.
Oh, that is interesting. All right, let's go to the website. Let's put in my date of birth. Okay, listeners, how do we feel about entering your date of birth when you go to a website? The month. Yep. The day.
Yeah.
Yep. The year. Oofty. Not that long ago. Come on.
What I love is there is not a teenager on Earth that can put in a different birth year. It won't allow it, right? No one can lie about that going onto a website.
We're all doing it, right? We've got it on our website as well.
Yeah, we have it on our website too.
Covering exercise.
CYA.
Right?
CYA.
So the website itself. Oh, here we go. Yeah, specifications: ABV 46%, which matches the label on the bottle. My sample also says 50, as you say there, Joshua.
Yeah, but both the samples that I have, the beer cast one that you're talking about, we'll be reviewing for next week, says 50% as well. So
here, let's see if we can do this in real time. I'm sending a quick question to Anna. Wine cask finish sample says
50%.
50%. Sample bottle says 50%, but bottle label and card say 46%. Which is it?
What say you? All right. So while we're waiting for Anna's response, do we like the nose?
I do. My usual question is, would I identify this as a Westland? Westland is, in this instance, Distillery X in any other X setting.
Yep.
And by X, I do not mean Twitter, just to be clear. And so would I identify it as Westland? There are some of those Westland notes coming through the chocolate we talked about there. Look at Anna is an amazing human being. She has confirmed it is 46% and it is a mistype on the sample.
There you go, 46%. Some people might call that 92 proof. Not me, Joe. Not me. I would not do that, Jason. All right. Well, while you're texting Anna, I'm going to give this a wee little sippy because I like what you said, right? It's, you nose it. Do you detect it as a Westland? I would argue as you dig into it, yes, you do. But the wine at first is like there's some obfuscation. Whew, say that 3 times real fast. Some obfuscation.
Say it once. Say it once well.
Right? It's like the wine is doing a little smoke and mirrors, but you spend enough time and you say, okay, there's the Westland. It's there. And then the more I nose it, I'm getting the wine a little less on the nose. So I'm going to go in on the taste now. Now that I've discovered, yes, it is clearly Westland in my opinion. Do you agree?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay. And that's, again, right, we're back to this cocktail conversation of the wine is integrated with the Westland here. It's not wine on Westland. It's not Westland under wine. It's wine and Westland.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah, I'm convinced. So interesting, right? The nose leads with the wine, and the spirit is in the background. And then when you taste it, the palate leads with the spirit, and the wine is in the background. It's like a perfect mirror image. It's like the upside down in Stranger Worlds. It's really interesting.
The other thing I would say is I'm not used to drinking Westland at 46% because my Westlands are Cask Exchange Program, they are Caleri over here, they are single casks from the distillery.
You need to be drinking more Flagship, Jason. You really do.
Oh, I agreed.
Yep.
Agreed wholeheartedly.
Yeah, because that at 46%, I think is an absolute belter.
What's that on the back end? Is that a heavy earthiness on the back? There's a fecundity there. which could be wine cask coming alive with grain.
Oh my gosh. I'll tell you what I get. Orange jujubes.
Orange jujubes.
Do you know jujubes?
There's one for an international audience.
That's a good question. I mean, it's a Haida candy, right? It's juji fruits, Red Hot Dollars, all those, and jujubes is one of them. Is that not on your former side of the pond?
Jujubes, no.
Yeah, it's an orangey note with a subtle floral quality to it, which is quite nice, right?
So here's the thing. I know you don't have these open in front of you, but the flavor profile on the website, the nose has dried rose on it, and the palate has Earl Grey tea.
There you go, right?
The palate also has dried strawberry.
It does?
Yeah.
Oh, man, I love that.
Yeah. Nose has raspberry reduction, palate has raspberry turnover.
Yeah.
And I turned my laptop over, but I didn't find out how that note ended.
Jason.
That is such a good dad joke. That's primo dad joke right there.
I got to use
The dads in the audience are loving that.
Absolutely loving
Anybody under the age of about 42 is maybe under the age of 34.
Yeah, 34. Like, I think once you become a dad, you download by osmosis dad jokes into your brain. Yeah, you know what? I am really liking this, but I was just thinking, I do wonder what the higher EBV would be doing. Are we missing anything? And I don't know that we are. I think I'm happy with 46% here.
Yeah, I try to be careful on that front, always thinking back to James Saxon and the Spaniard and saying, well, if the Spaniard was a bit higher proof in him saying, we did the research, we did the work, and this is what it worked at the best. I try to be careful about, if this had a bit more oomph, it's... try not to be wanky about it. You're also looking at 46, hits a price point on a shelf, makes it accessible, but doesn't make it too basic, like a 40 or a 43.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that, putting it together at 46. I also think it then complements the flagship that you're saying wonderful things about.
Yeah.
Which I also agree on. Just to be clear, I also agree on the flagship.
and also, to be clear, my questioning of it being, would this be better at 50%, was not me saying that I think it would be. It was just me thinking out loud and sort of going through that, am I enjoying it thoroughly at 46%? And the more I sip it, and then the more I go back to the nose and back and forth, the more I'm perfectly happy with where it is. Like, I think it's delivering so well. The spirit character, which is never lost on this, which I really like. And then some of those sort of richer red fruits coming through because of the wine and that the earthy / floral quality. I'm taken.
Yeah, I'm actually texting Anna a follow-up question. This is amazing. We're having a text interview on the podcast in real time. I asked the question, is the idea with the wine and beer batches to be similar or to alter the types of casks being used? It gets described as part of the cask exploration, right, that they are in. And so Anna, bless her, has written straight back to say they are new additions to our new core range and will be evergreen products. And then she insert joke about the evergreen states. Kudos to Anna on that one. They will have a through line to connect them, but they will be tweaked every batch. They won't be the exact same every time, but similar-ish.
Okay.
She then goes on to say, but they will not be as different between them as the outpost range. So Calera, Gariana, Solum.
Yep.
Those are meant to be vastly different every edition. So I think that really speaks to how I think of batched releases from distilleries.
Right? That makes me think of Abulauer Abuna or the Tamdu batch strength, or things like that, where pretty much the same age, pretty much sherry cask stuff, and there's just going to be subtle differences, and if you love it, keep exploring. I like that. Yep.
Or to put batches up against each other.
Exactly.
Where are the differences? Yeah. What is your favorite batch? How did that one go? Where did that one go?
That's what I meant. You're just using more words than me.
Yeah. As we established early, 13 years of parsing Joshua Hassan's statements.
Oh, I'll tell you what. I just got a really interesting note on the nose here. And it is melting cheddar cheese as it starts to burn. This sort of fattiness that comes through.
The Maillard reaction.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the part that I go for the most. Like, if we're making like little quesadillas or something like that at home and some of the cheese ekes out and gets a little burned, I'm like, yes, I will be having that. And I will serve you your perfect quesadilla without the best bits.
Is this a mid-afternoon recording while drinking alcohol? And the thing I would say for it is, one of the questions we always ask, would we pull this out for friends? Someone comes over, would you pour them a dram of this? Would you want to show it to them? If I had a Westland loving friend, I think I would use this to push the envelope, to show them an additional point of interest. I think if I was getting somebody who didn't know Westland, I would want to show them the flagship and show them that kind of nice, straightforward, here's how to understand Westland. Yeah. But I could see myself pulling that out, perhaps seasonally.
Yeah, and so that's what I was going to say. I think for me, this is something I'd want to pour when sweater weather comes. That's when I would reach for it personally. But would I share it with friends? This is one that I would pull out at any time to share with friends. And if they didn't know Westland, it would be in conjunction with the flagship or a single cask nation bottling.
Listen, we pour all the Westlands all the time, and we're not even Jess.
I know, right?
So imagine what Jess pours for people. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's tough not to go onto the beer cask so we could do the comparison with the wine cask.
We have to show restraint, Jason.
We do have to show restraint. I want to say thank you to Anna for the samples. Thank you to Anna for answering my questions over text live during the podcast recording.
Right, amazing. Thank you, Anna.
She's wonderful. I really appreciate her.
Indeed.
And good whiskey.
Yep.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, really nice. Well done. Well made. Yeah. I mean, sweater weather is coming, Jason. I know you don't want to hear it. I know you don't want to believe it, but it's coming. So that means I may have to get a bottle of this. So
another Segui within the episode. Endless.
So thanks again, Tzvi, for joining the conversation. It was lovely having that catch up. Really lovely hearing, that Jason and I were part of your origin story. That like you didn't know your career would be in whiskey, and it was only because of all the help you did with Whiskey Jubilee, and the fact that we could be even a small part of your own personal story and journey really is special, and it means a lot. So
yeah,
thank
really
you.
Cool. Really cool. It's like if those two jamokes can do it, anybody can do it. Consider yourself inspired.
Thank you to Anna Hinz and Westland for the samples, and of course to the listeners. Oh,
Keith Duncan for his email along with Greg.
Well done. Good job. And we will see you all in 2 weeks when we interview Lasse from Stauning Distillery out of Denmark.
And we taste the beer cask finished Westland.
Indeed.
This is me showing restraint, Joshua.
It's so hard. So hard. You've got
Cheers
the
all.
hardest restraint I've ever known.
Paging HR now. Get back in the box.
Cheers.